Y'all know how Irish people used to be supremely racist in America. And that's due to the way that America has perceived of waves of immigration from outside, right? Because every new wave of immigrant that comes to this country, they are immediately suspect, and Americans treat them as outsiders. And the way that these immigrants can become insiders is to join in on some of the most American practices. Unfortunately, when it comes to a racist society based on the extermination of the indigenous people and on slavery, the way to do that is by becoming a white nationalist yourself and making sure that you get categorized as white in opposition to those people, right, to Black and Indigenous Americans. So that is what the Irish did. That is also what every other wave of immigrants has done, including some of the current waves that we have, right, which is why there is this tension between some of the immigrant groups who are now facing a crackdown under our current regime, and some of the people, Black and Indigenous people, who've been fighting the regime ever since white people got here, right? Anyway, all that to say, you know how a lot of the American Irish were seen as super racist? Because they were super racist, to be clear. Well, the Civil War was the place where some of the most racist people got to see where that ideology would take us. So this is Captain Thomas Fitzgibbon. He was a Civil War officer who was with the Michigan Volunteers, marched down into the South, and began liberating slave labor camps, and also scooping up refugees as he was exterminating some of the guerrilla forces of the rebelling Confederate Army, right? And in doing so, he found things that made him sick to his very stomach. And he wrote this letter to his friend, another Irish-born American who was living in Pennsylvania at the time, to let him know, like, hey, I know that I don't like Black people, but, and he goes on this long abolitionist tract and shows just how disgusting the institution of slavery has become. And not only that, but how disgusting the institution of slavery has made the white people behave. And you can read the full letter here. It's pretty hard going, but something that I think is so important to bring out here is that he talks about the ways in which slavery caused people to commit disgusting, incestuous SA with their own children, their own siblings, because of how the laws shook out when it came to the product of these violent unions. And that brings me to this book here, which is one of the best I've read in a while, which sort of like lays out the way that power structures affected white and Black people of places where slavery was legal, right? And it's a comparative study, so they really look all over, not just the US, which I think is really important. And what this Civil War soldier saw, the Civil War captain Fitzgibbon, really lines up with what some of these historians are studying in terms of enslavers assaulting the women that they enslaved, which then produces children. And those children, because they have a Black parent, are seen as legally Black because of the one-drop rule, which means they are also enslaved, which means that legally they are not considered human beings. Therefore, when the enslavers' legitimate white children force themselves onto the Black children of this SA union, it's incestual assault that is happening within these planter families. And that was very much normalized, and it was even encouraged, because if you are an enslaver, one of the ways that you can increase your profits is to ensure that the people you've enslaved create as many children as possible. And one of the ways to do that is through SA, and that is what happened in most families, if not all of them, right? And this is something that the women who were married to enslavers knew about, and were very salty about, right? But didn't stop, and in fact, they often let their anger over this out onto the enslaved. So the poor enslaved just couldn't get away from it, right? And so this book is really important in helping us get our heads around the whole nature of the full extent of the violence that enslaved people really suffered under this institution. And the fact that it was so heinously disgusting that even a racist Irish man who didn't want to fight alongside Black people, who didn't think that we had any reason to eradicate slavery before he took up his arms to fight, what caused him to become a full-blown abolitionist, right? So highly recommend you get yourself a copy, Sexuality and Slavery by Diana Ramey Berry and Leslie Harris.